I think they like you, Bobby. Bobby, would you ever think that you would enter like a rock star at a Republican conservative gathering like that?
No. I mean, you and I talked earlier today about how there's been an inversion of the political parties, and you said it very well here. The party that I grew up in, the party of Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy, were the parties of peace. It was a party of civil rights, which means constitutional rights, particularly freedom of speech. The word liberal is derived from a word meaning freedom of speech. It was the party of skepticism and resistance against the corporate domination and subversion of our democracy. And it was the party of the working people, of cops and firefighters, of labor, of small businesses, of the little guy in this country, and against Wall Street. Today, that party is the party of war. You saw Kamala Harris's speech at the convention, which was this extremely neocon, belligerent speech about world conquest and world domination. She was preceded onto the stand by the former CIA director. This is something that would be unthinkable. She has touted now her endorsement by Dick Cheney and by John Bolton. These are the neocons that brought us the Patriot Act. They brought us the surveillance state. They brought us censorship. They brought us the war in Iraq, the worst debacle in American foreign policy history. And it's the party it's a party of Wall Street, a big pharma, big tech, big agriculture, big food, the military industrial complex. The Republican Party has now become the party of working people. During the and Main Street businesses. And, you know, I mentioned this to you earlier, that during the 2020 election, roughly 50% of the country voted for President Trump and 50% for President Biden. The 50% that voted, the 50% that supported Donald Trump owned 30% of the wealth in this country. The 50% that supported President Biden owned 70%. So there's been this extraordinary inversion of the two parties, and you know, I think I don't feel at home with people who believe in censorship. I think it's disqualifying. It's antithetical and inconsistent with democracy. And we had Hillary Clinton yesterday making this extraordinary statement that endorsing this censorship of speech in our country. We have Kamala Harris saying that free speech is a privilege, it's not a right. And Tim Walz saying the same thing. And I think that is disqualifying for anybody who wants to be president of the United States to believe in censorship.
I mean, I am blown away. I mean, look around this room. I don't think it's just me. I think there's something very special happening here. When Donald Trump, a couple miles away, stood at that podium and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. walked out and Donald Trump said, "Make America healthy again," I think it was one of the most important political moments in our lifetime. And what I think the history books are going to say is this was the moment where political parties have completely realigned. It is not left versus right. It's not this insignificant trivia that the media is trying to get us to debate. It is us versus a uniparty. It is us versus corruption. And there is no bigger institution in this country and no more corrupt institution in this country than our healthcare industry. The fastest growing industry in the United States, you think it's AI or technology, it's healthcare. It's also the largest, producing sicker, more depressed, fatter, more infertile Americans for each dollar we spend. There's a slur, I think, that's occurring in America from our elite institutions. It's a slur my sister at Stanford Medical School learned the first day of classes. The dean of Stanford Medical School stood at the podium and told these budding doctors that the American patient's lazy. He said that the American patient wants to be sick, that all the medical system can do is stand with a scalpel and a prescription pad and clean up the mess of these kids that want to be sedentary, of these parents that want to feed their kids ultra-processed food. That's what she was indoctrinated with. That is what they say. When she brought up a dietary intervention at Stanford, when she brought up a dietary intervention to a patient with a migraine and 6 other comorbidities, she read some PubMed articles. She said, maybe you should look at your diet. She was reprimanded. The attending surgeon said, you didn't go to nutrition school. That's fringe science. You are supposed to cut people open. That is the norm in our medical system today. We have a situation fundamentally where 9 out of 10 killers of Americans are foodborne lifestyle illnesses. This is not a political issue. It's just a scientific fact. From our USDA and the FDA and our institutions that we trust, we should be getting the clinical reality, which is that we're poisoning our kids. But instead, the USDA says that a diet 93% in ultra-processed food can be healthy for kids. They say that a 12-year-old should be getting Ozempic as the first-line defense. SSRI rates have doubled among high schoolers. So what happened a couple miles away and what this movement means is we and this party is focusing on big ideas. We are focusing on getting Americans healthy. We are focusing on taking our autonomy back from these corrupt institutions.
So, Bobby, you have been a lifelong fighter for children. And I think it would help the audience for you to explain that work if they're not familiar, and also talk about the severity of what we are facing, the chronic diseases, the chronic illnesses. We are the worst in the world, the developed world, on these issues. Yet we are the wealthiest country ever, and we are the greatest nation ever. Yet we have this massive issue that no one wants to look square in the eye and saying our kids are not just inheriting a worse country than their parents, which they are. They themselves are sicker than their parents were at the same age. And I want you to take a pause and let that set in. We're told that we're advancing at record rates. We have AI, we have ChatGPT, we have drugs for everything. Yet why is it that our 8-year-olds are far sicker than 8-year-olds were 30 years ago? Bobby, please.
I started out as representing commercial fishermen and recreational fishermen on the Hudson River, suing big polluters, and it was a group that was not politically involved. We have the oldest commercial fishery in North America on the Hudson. It's 350 years old. Many of the people that I represented for 40 years, come from families that have been fishing the river commercially for 350 years. They use the same fishing methods that were taught by the Algonquin Indians, the original Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam, and then passed down through the generations. And in 1966, Penn Central Railroad began vomiting oil from a 4.5-foot pipe in the Croton-Harmon rail yard into the Hudson. It blackened the beaches. It made the shad taste of diesel. And the people in Crotonville, New York, which is one of the enclaves of the commercial fishery, began sending representatives to the state agencies, the Department of Conservation, the Coast Guard, the Corps of Engineers, and begging them to do their job, which they were legally required to do, to shut down the Penn Central pipe. And they were given the bum's rush. They were told, these are important people. The board of directors of Penn Central are some of the most powerful people in New York State. And they were told, we can't enforce the law against them. We cannot make them comply with the law. And in March of 1966, 300 people met in the American Legion Hall in Crotonville. and they started talking about violence. They had been to the government agencies. They had come to the conclusion that the government was in cahoots with the polluters. And this is a lesson that I learned, that I took with me when I started working on children's health, that these agencies actually become sock puppets. They become captive by the industries they're supposed to regulate. And they started suing. They hired me as an attorney. We started suing. We brought over 500 lawsuits on the Hudson. We forced polluters to spend $5.5 billion remediating the river. Today, the Hudson is the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. The miraculous resurrection of the Hudson inspired the creation of river keepers all around our country. All the major rivers now have river keepers. And in 2003, the National Academy of Sciences and the FDA did a joint study in which they found that every freshwater fish in America had dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. And the mercury was coming from coal-burning power plants and cement kilns mainly. And so we started suing them, and I had about 40 lawsuits against these power plants for mercury discharges. And women started coming up to me. I was speaking all around the country about this. Women started coming to these, almost every speech I did, and they'd sit in the front row, and they'd wait till the end, and then they'd come up to me and ask to talk to me, and they were very respectful, but they would gently scold me about mercury in the vaccines. All of them were women, as it turns out, who had children with intellectual disabilities, and they believed their children had been injured by vaccines. And this was something I didn't want to do, I didn't want to get into, but one of them showed up at my house in Massachusetts, a woman, a psychologist named Sarah Bridges from Minnesota, and she came to my home. She had a son who had received $20 million from the vaccine court, forgetting the vaccine court had found that he had gotten autism from a vaccine. She came to my home with a pile of studies, 18 inches thick. She found my home. She put it on the front porch. She rang the doorbell, and when I came to the door, she pointed to it, and she said, "I'm not leaving here till you read these studies." And I'm accustomed to reading science. That's what I do for a living. All the lawsuits that I brought have involved scientific controversies, and all of them involve a process of reading the science critically and then cross-examining proponents of that science, direct examining people who are differing with it. And I read this before I got 6 inches down on this pile. I was reading the abstracts. I was just dumbstruck by the giant delta between what the public agencies were saying about vaccine safety and what the actual science was saying. And I saw that somebody was lying. And I decided I had to listen to these mothers. And I started investigating this issue and finding all kinds of holes in it. And this was the decision that really ruined my life in many ways. But I saw that our children were sick. Now, I had 11 siblings. I had 70 first cousins. And I never knew anybody with a peanut allergy. And I was asking, why do 5 of my 7 kids have life-threatening allergies? And I started seeing this all around and wondering why nobody was talking about it. The autism rates in my generation and 70-year-old men are between, depending on what study you read, are between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in 1,500 today, right now, in 70-year-old men. The autism rates in my children are 1 in every 34, according to CDC, and in some states, like California, 1 in 22. And I was astonished that nobody else was taking notice of this, that there'd been a huge change. You mentioned in your introduction that there's this story that this is genetic. Well, I knew enough about science to know that genes do not cause epidemics. They may provide a vulnerability, but you need an environmental toxin. Something had happened to our kids, and we saw these giant explosions of neurological diseases, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, sleeping disorders, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, autoimmune diseases like juvenile diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician would see one case of diabetes in his lifetime over a 40 or 50-year career. In my kids' generation, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through a pediatrician door today has diabetes or is pre-diabetic. And we're spending more on our military expenditures. We're spending more on diabetes, mitochondrial disorders, than we are on the military. The total cost when my uncle was president, about 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, the latest study, NIH stopped doing this tabulation, but the last time they did it was in 2006, and 54% of Americans, kids, now have chronic disease. It's probably up to 60 today, 60%. But we've gone from 6% to 60%. The entire cost of treating chronic disease when my uncle was president, I was 10 years old, was zero. Zero. There weren't even drugs to treat it. Today, it's $4.3 trillion. So we are bankrupting this country. 77% of American kids are too disabled to qualify for military service. It affects our economy. It affects our national security. It affects our national morale. And then the allergic disease, like I never knew anybody with peanut allergy when I was a kid. I never knew anybody with food allergies. Today, there are EpiPens in every classroom. We all know kids with peanut allergies. And I'll tell you something, that Congress said to EPA, tell us what year the autism epidemic began. And the EPA came in. EPA is a captive agency, but it's captive by the oil companies and the coal companies and the chemical companies, not by food and not by pharma, because it doesn't regulate them. So it actually did an honest study, and it came back and said in 1989, it is a red line that was the change year. Well, that year changed a lot of other things. The food allergies suddenly appeared, the autoimmune diseases suddenly became prevalent, and these neurological diseases suddenly exploded, and obesity began exploding. So something happened during that period of time that changed the profile, and today, Americans have a higher chronic disease burden than any nation in the world. I'll say one last thing. During a New York Times reporter interviewed me, a health reporter who I've never talked to before, and says she's going to do a fair article. She's doing an article because the Times is scared that I may get a post in the Trump administration that is going to put me in having something to do with health policies. And she asked me about this, and I said, look, the only thing I want is evidence-based science, and we don't have that today. We don't have evidence-based medicine anymore. The medical treatments and the medical decisions and policies are based upon the mercantile interests of these giant companies that now control our public health agencies. And that has to be changed. During COVID, we had the highest death rate of any nation in the world, the highest body count. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in the United States. We only have 4.2% of the global population. So, and why are people getting awards for this? We literally did worse than any country in the world. And CDC said, well, it's not our problem. It's not our fault. It's the fault of the American people because they're so sick. The CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So they had asthma, they had obesity, diabetes, and one other thing. And This New York Times reporter says people in the medical community are scared that you're going to turn the attention away from infectious disease. And I said to her, we haven't had a pandemic in 100 years prior to COVID. And in COVID, and 95% of the deaths, 70% of the deaths worldwide are from chronic disease. 95% of the deaths in our country are from chronic disease. COVID, the people were actually dying, according to CDC, not from COVID. Healthy people didn't die from COVID. They were dying from chronic disease. And we need to change America's policies so that we identify what the origins are, what the etiology is, what the causes are of chronic disease, and we eliminate those and make ourselves healthy again.
So, Calley, I want to clarify something, because what the pharmaceutical companies will say, all that's true, Bobby, but we've changed the methodology of what we consider to be an autistic child. So, Calley, I know you address this, and I know you do, Bobby. I think it's very important. Are we categorizing and using different tests of what is considered to be a 8-year-old positive autism today versus 30 years ago? Are we otherwise, in simple parlance, comparing apples to apples?
The biggest crime of the medical industrial complex is that it has allowed many Americans to take leave of their common sense. Everything is going up all at once. Let's look around us. Robert said the statistics. 50% of kids are overweight or obese. This is not because of tracking. This is not because of new guidelines. This is happening. Any parents here have young children walking into a classroom? Is something happening in there? Is something happening with children's mental health? Is something happening with the metabolic dysfunction, with the statin prescriptions, with the metformin prescriptions, with the prediabetes rates, which is now 33% of young adults? So everything is going up all at once. We have never heard of a case of an autoimmune condition among a child a generation ago. So Casey, my sister, talked about this on Tucker, and she's dug into this. To answer your question directly, the tracking and the diagnosis standards have not changed, and there is a crisis happening right now.
Yeah, and so therefore...
And let me add something to that. This is a propaganda trope by the pharmaceutical industry and by the regulatory agencies that we've changed the diagnostic criteria and we've changed the recognition is better, and we're more able to recognize autism. There have been study after study of that supposition, of that hypothesis. In fact, the California legislature asked the Mind Institute and gave them huge amounts of funding at Stanford, or UC Davis rather, to actually to verify that hypothesis. And the Mind Institute, the leading doctor, Dr. Irva Hertzpachoda, came back and said, no, this is not tracking. It is not changed diagnostic criteria. The incidence of autism has changed. Now, I spend my life, a lot of my younger years, at the front lines of the movement to get rights for Americans with intellectual disabilities. My aunt Eunice Shriver, who is my godmother, founded Special Olympics. I worked in Special Olympics. Prior to 1968, Special Olympics was called Camp Shriver, and it was at her home in Bethesda, Maryland. And I grew up there. I went every weekend and worked as a hugger and a coach. We never saw a kid with autism. I worked for it because of my family's long involvement with this space. I worked for 200 hours in Wassaic Home for the Retarded when I was in high school. I never saw anybody with autism. People didn't know what it was. We prided ourselves in Special Olympics at being able to handle any child, even kids who are almost in a vegetative state. We would figure out something for them to do. They could sit on a platform and push a beanbag off a table, and the crowd would give them an ovation for that. But kids with autism, we could never have handled. We never saw one. Nobody knew what to handle. We can't handle them because they have these tactile sensitivities, they have audio sensitivities, they have light sensitivities. They're violent, they're headbanging, they're biting, they're stimming. They're doing things that we simply could not have handled it, and we never saw them. Most Americans had never heard of autism until 1988 when Rain Man came out. And at that point, it was kind of still Asperger's. It was your quirky uncle. And those people were around, but full-blown autism, stimming, head-banging, toe-walking, hand-flapping, nonverbal, non-toilet chain. We never saw any kids like that. And I've never seen anybody my age who look like that. Where are the people who look like that who are walking around the mall? If there was change criteria, use your common sense, we would change that criteria for elderly people as well. You'd see 70-year-olds who are diagnosed with autism. You don't. So,
That's the best
and they're not
argument.
housed anywhere. There's not a place for them to go. They're not warehoused. They would be out on the street. You would see them at the mall. And, people wearing helmets, men my age wearing helmets, wearing diapers because they're not toilet trained. You don't see them. You've never seen anybody that looks like that who is my age. And yet, in my kids' generation, is 1 in every 34 kids.
Charlie, just last point here. I think what's happening to children's health is the best and most visual manifestation of this corruption that we're all trying to put our finger on. This corruption that, to me, has made Donald Trump the seminal political figure of our lifetime. To me, the thesis and the rationale of Donald Trump's candidacy is correct, and it is that there's something happening to the co-opting of our institutions that we trust, to the military-industrial complex, to the healthcare-industrial complex, to our education system that is totally letting down kids. And we have an explosion where this year it is the highest rate in American history of childhood cancer, of childhood autism, of childhood autoimmune conditions, of childhood diabetes, of childhood heart disease, of childhood obesity. Everything's at an all-time high right now. We can see it, and we're being told that's not true.
But we're the wealthiest we've ever been. Our GDP is the highest it's ever been. We have more billionaires. We have, quote-unquote, more medical advancements. You can't turn on a YouTube video about them bragging about how ASU is a leader in all these healthcare things, right, guys? Amazing, we're building new hospitals, all that. But so there's a disconnect here. Is it because we're really good at treating acute and not chronic illnesses?
Acute issues make up 5% of the U.S. healthcare budget. If you have a complicated childbirth, if your child has an infection that's going to kill them right away, if you have a burst appendix, the U.S. medical system is a miracle. Peter Attia, the first chart in his book, Outlive, if you take out infectious and acute issues, things that are going to kill you right away, life expectancy has not increased in the past 100 years. The chronic disease crisis, the chronic disease management, which is now 95% of medical spending, has been an utter failure. As we have prescribed more statins, heart disease has gone up. As we prescribed more SSRIs, depression and suicide has gone up. As we prescribe more metformin, diabetes is off the charts. And now they're pushing, as we know, Ozempic, this Denmark company, the 9th most valuable company in the world, with an expectation of 90% of their profits coming from the United States taxpayer. They are pushing Ozempic on kids. And what do the stock estimates say from J.P. Morgan when it estimates the growth of this stock? What do they estimate when you look into there? I looked into it. And J.P. Morgan expects obesity in America to increase as more Ozempic is prescribed. Interesting. There has never been a chronic disease treatment in American history that has lowered rates of the chronic conditions that it is meant to treat. The chronic disease is what's hobbling our country, and we don't want this. And I want to flip it real quick, and listening to what Robert's saying, listening to what we're talking about, it sounds somewhat dire. I am so optimistic. And I will just say, from my small vantage point, just watching Robert and watching President Trump talk about this issue, there was deep bonding. It wasn't about political horse racing. It wasn't about the polling. There was hours and hours of conversations between these two men about childhood diabetes, talking about how they want to put a graphic in the Oval Office, and they want to stake this presidency on lowering rates of childhood chronic disease. And And the reason we should be optimistic is because nobody wants what's happening, and it's actually very easy to fix. It's what Robert talks about with correcting corporate capture. The medical system knows how to say something strongly. They know how to tell you that you are a war criminal if you don't give your kids 72 shots on the exact schedule they say. But when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to 70% of our child's diet being ultra-processed food, when we have a metabolic health crisis among children, oh, no, we can't afford that. We can't, possibly expect lower-income parents not to poison their kids. That's expecting too much. That's classist. That's racist. There's no cost too high when it comes to a pharmaceutical intervention, right? There's no compromise. But when it comes to what's actually causing the issue, it's hands off. If we have moral clarity and get in and tell the NIH that 80% of their funding can't go to conflicted scientists anymore. Tell the FDA that it can no longer be funded by 75% pharmaceutical, fundamentally incentivized for the pharmaceutical industry to grow. And fire every single nutrition researcher at the USDA. And start following the science and start taking over these agencies with people that are not conflicted and getting real medical guidance about what's happening. If we get the truth, Charlie, we're going to be okay.
I love that. So, Bobby, I want to throw it to you here. Then I want to do some questions because it's a town hall and people want to ask you questions. But in order to do all those things that Calley said, the obvious thing needs to happen. Donald Trump needs to win in November. This is not a – I want you to do two things, Bobby. I want you to tell about how you reached out to Kamala Harris and offered to have a meeting about this topic. You ran for the presidency as a Democrat, then an independent, and you said, hey, this shouldn't be a partisan issue, but talk about how Kamala Harris was uninterested in this topic, and number two, how Donald Trump plans to make this a top priority of his administration, and why you are campaigning the country on his behalf.
Yeah, and let me begin by just adding one footnote to the point I made earlier. There was a researcher, a writer named Dan Olmsted, and he was very curious about unvaccinated populations, and the Amish are one of those populations. So he went and he did a study of the Amish in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and there should have been, I think, about, if it was following the national trends, there should have been about 2,000 autism cases, and they were able to find 3, and all of them were children who had been adopted by the Amish after receiving their vaccines. Of the Amish in general, they could not find any. And this is true in other places around the world. There's a link between that. And I do not believe that autism is just caused by vaccines. I think there's very strong evidence that it is one of the major causative factors. But all of these diseases are linked. They all operate along the same biological pathways. And they're caused by stress to our mitochondria. And we're stressing the mitochondria through many, many vectors. Through the air we breathe, mainly through the foods we eat, but also some of the medications that our kids taking are contributed to it. The chronology here's the chronology. The day that President Trump was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, I received a call from Calley a couple of hours after the shooting, and he asked me if I'd be willing to talk to the Trump team with whom he had been in contact, and Calley had been advising me for a long time about these issues. And I said at first no, and then I sent him a text a short time later after talking to some members of my family and said, yeah, I would talk to them. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to them just was because out of compassion about what had happened to him that night and what had happened, the similarities of what happened to my own family, he called me. Tucker then contacted me on a 3-way text with President Trump. And President Trump.
That is so Tucker. Might I add?
And then
Hey, you guys should talk.
And then, yeah, that's a good imitation too. And President Trump and I spent. He then called me, and I spent I don't know, probably about 30 minutes on the phone with him, and we talked about this issue. And he asked to see me, and we met the following day in Milwaukee. And we talked. We had about a 2.5 hour meeting then, and then we talked after that repeatedly, and we ended up talking. I ended up going to see him again at Mar-a-Lago. But between the Mar-a-Lago visit and that first night, the night after the shooting, I reached out to, and we had talked during our first meeting in Milwaukee extensively about this issue, about making America healthy. I reached out afterward to Kamala Harris, and I reached her through a number of people who of course I know, top Democrats, and I reached out through those Democrats to her, and I was told by all of them that she would not talk to me under any conditions. So that was the message that I got, and I told them that I wanted to speak about the health issue. So and then I met with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and President Trump said we talked about a unity party, about bringing our followers in, the independent party. And he asked me to take a role when he gets elected in the government in eliminating chronic disease as a major impact in American life. And he asked me to be on his transition team after we talked about Tulsi that night as well. And every commitment that the president made to me, he has kept. I'm now on the transition team. We're actively picking the people who will govern the country in this aspect of government. And among the people we've specifically talked about is including Casey and Calley Means in the government. Well, Calley said a moment ago how optimistic he was about the future of our country, and I'm very, very optimistic as well, because I think this is really going to happen.
I love that. I want to get to some questions, but I just want to do a very quick follow-up. And so it is a dead sprint from now till November. You're campaigning actively for him in these key states. And I just want to reiterate something that Bobby said. The power of the transition team. You're not voting for Trump. You're voting for 5,000 people that will run your government. You're not voting for Trump. And that's what you have to tell all your friends, everybody. Do you think that Donald Trump will assemble 5,000 better people, more in line with your worldview, maybe not perfect, or Kamala Harris? That's what's on the ticket. It is a team of 5,000 people. And that goes from everything from the Department of Defense to the border to all these issues. And they want to try to personalize this election in the media. They want to try to make you feel emotional about something Trump said or did not say. But we will win if we can rise above that and say, hey, you have Bobby Kennedy involved in a presidential transition team of who's going to be at the FDA, the CDC, the NIH. I mean, that's a game changer.
And I'd add, I heard a rumor Elon's looking to drive some. He's looking to drive government efficiency, and last time I checked, the HHS is the largest and most expensive government department. I'd love to see him getting in there with you and driving some efficiency.
And just look at this team, everybody. This is the Avengers team. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi is the former co-chair of the DNC. Just a couple years ago. You got Elon Musk, who is the world's wealthiest man, and is a free thinker and used to be an Obama supporter. Of course, Bobby Kennedy. And I think it's really something for those of us that can see what's really going on in the country, beyond just the media news cycle and the chatter on cable TV. We know that we are at risk of losing our country because there's an unelected oligarchy that is making decisions for health, for border, for war, and this is our opportunity. Our framers gave us this, especially here in Arizona, because these electoral votes are going to matter a lot, are going to say, hey, you could take back those 5,000 positions. You can all of a sudden say, no, Anthony Fauci, all of your minions are gone in the FDA. They're gone. All of them. All right, let's do some questions, everybody. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I think we're going to start doing a line. Try to make it a question, not a statement with a question mark at the end. I am more than happy to answer your questions, but we're here tonight to hear from Bobby and Calley. Also, I want to plug Calley's book, Good Energy. It is terrific. You guys have not yet checked it out. And before we get to the first question, everybody, your marching orders are more than just voting. Understand, in Arizona here, we must do the work during voting month to get our friends that are lower likely to vote in that voting month period. The voting month period starts on October 9th. If all of us just show up on Election Day, that's fine. However, there's a lot of people that are going to forget to show up on Election Day. There's a lot of people, it makes more sense for us to get them to vote early and to bank their vote in the system. Why should we give the Democrats 35 days to go chase ballots, and we only have 12 hours to try to match them? We have the biggest, most diverse movement in American political history. Shouldn't we give our followers more days to vote, not less days to vote? And so if you are compelled to do something, we at Turning Point Action have assembled the largest ever ballot-chasing army in the history of Republican politics. It's right here in this state. It's so simple. You can begin by downloading the Turning Point Action app, by taking out your phone. It's TP Action. It could take 15 minutes a day to chase 5 ballots, 6 ballots. Our team will put you to work. If you're like, boy, this has been an answer to prayer to maybe get Bobby Kennedy, because I know a lot of you have been following Bobby for years and his work at the Child Defense Fund, then you got to do the work, and we will put you to work because we need an army of volunteers to overcome what the Democrats have planned. Yes, sir, you'll be the first question.
Okay. I got it. Hi, my name's Kevin Modis. I'm the outreach director for the California Brain Tumor Association, and need convention tickets at gmail.com. People are going to ask me about my email. All the things you've talked about, lower fertility, increased cancer rates, increased autism, have been associated with wireless radiation exposure. And the World Health Organization's already classified wireless as a Class 2B carcinogen, saying that it's not safe. And the recent National Toxicology NIH study cell phone study showed clear evidence of carcinogenicity and the DNA damage non-thermally below our safety guidelines, which only protect against actually heating of the flesh. Your lawsuit, Bobby, EHT versus the FCC, which you were nice enough to do with groups that have been working on this issue for decades and people who are already microwave sick. The judge ruled that children, the evidence has not been reviewed or considered enough for children, the environment, for long-term exposures, and for technology, new technology, since 1996. This was the judge's ruling, and yet no one knows about this. And literally, as you said, let's use our common sense. The answer, in this case, may be right under our noses with this wireless radiation exposure. And what happened in '89? We started rolling out cell towers. We started rolling out cell towers.
I'm just going to put my cell phone here, by the way. So,
My question is this: what's the plan in terms of regulation? Because the FCC has been clearly shown to be a
great question,
captured agent.
Bobby. Yeah.
So I was one of 2 attorneys on that case, and we won that case in front of the Federal Court of Appeals in Washington. There were over 10,000 studies cited in our arguments that showed the dangers of cell phone radiation, really horrendous dangers. And it's one of the reasons that other countries really limit cell phone radiation, which we don't in this country. In fact, there are many countries now in Europe that are banning, and Russia that are banning cell phones in schools. And I would say to you, all of you who are parents, whatever you do, do not let your kids put a cell phone near their head. Don't let them hold it near parts of their bodies, their ovaries or their testes. Don't let them keep them in their front pockets. Don't let them keep it in the breast pockets. And whatever you do, don't let them go to sleep with a cell phone next to their head, which is what they want to do. But the judges in that case ordered, which is almost 2 years ago, the panel ordered FCC to go back to the drawing board and to review the science. And if they review the science, there's going to be a lot of new rules that are very, very strict. FCC has been stonewalling, dragging its feet, refusing to do that. As soon as we get into office, we are going to make sure that that study gets done.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you. Thank you. We'll get to the next question. Thank you.
And it's illegal to look at health effects when you're
Right.
placing a cell tower.
Thank you so much.
It's illegal in this country.
Thank you very much.
May I just hold it? Okay, thanks. My name is Brad. First off, to this gentleman's credit, and what most everybody here doesn't realize is that there is a cell phone tower in almost every schoolyard in this city. Every single schoolyard has a cell phone tower in it in this city. That was brought to you, I believe, by Janet Napolitano. Anyway, I am here, if you don't mind, I would like to expose something in the medical industry. I was given a drug in 2006.
Only if it's a question. You got like 20 seconds.
No, this is not a question.
Well,
but I
then,
need
I'm
to
sorry.
publicly-
We're not going to do that. Next question. Thank you very much.
Can I-
Sorry, sir. Thank you very much. We're going to get to questions. Thank you. Yep, I warned you guys. This is not a time for you to be famous about some medical error. You can meet with Bobby afterwards. Thank you, sir, very much. I'm sure it's very corrupt. When we take over the government, we'll fix it. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'll try and speak quickly. Americans want higher quality health care, and the doctors and nurses in the health freedom movement have been penalized for helping their patients and saving lives. As the president has the power to divide, consolidate, abolish, or create agencies of the U.S. federal government by presidential directive via the Presidential Reorganization Authority. Question: what are your thoughts regarding utilizing the Presidential Reorganization Authority to create parallel agencies that, when implemented and data tracked, will show dramatic improvement in patient outcomes, rendering previous systems obsolete?
Yeah, I mean, my initial inclination would not be to start a new agency. My initial inclination would be to use the Justice Department and the moral authority of the office, but also, the Justice Department should immediately call in begin an investigation of the medical boards and the collusion between the pharmaceutical industry and the medical boards that are delicensing these physicians who actually try to heal patients and try to treat them. The Justice Department will also call in the medical journals that are corrupted by the pharmaceutical industry and explain to them that they're all going to be subject to criminal and civil RICO actions if they don't show us a way that they're going to stop revoking studies and refusing to publish studies that challenge the mercantile interests of pharmaceutical companies. We're going to change the way business is done at NIH. We're going to start studying. We're going to take one of the problems with NIH, when I was a boy, was the finest public health agency and the greatest scientific research group in the history of mankind. There were many other nations in the world that were not able to afford the kind of science that we had, that actually have in their constitutions that if NIH says it's so, then it's so. If FDA says it's so, then it's so. Because our health agencies were the gold standard of the world, and they were actually doing their jobs, and they can do them again. We passed a law called the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, and that law really it gave perverse incentives. One of the things the law did is it said that NIH scientists who work on the development of new drugs can individually collect royalties on those drugs forever. Those royalties today are about $150,000 per drug. So the Moderna vaccine was developed by NIH. 50% of its royalties, which are tens of billions of dollars, go to NIH. But there are 6 scientists at NIH who are designated by Anthony Fauci, high-level officials of that agency, who get to collect $150,000 a year forever. Their children, their children's children, as long as the mRNA platform is on the market, they will be making money. So you have scientists whose job it is to find problems with these products, and instead they have this enormous economic incentive. These royalties are paying for their rent, they're paying for their mortgages, they're paying for their children's education, they're paying for their boats, they're paying for their alimonies, and so they have a big incentive not to find problems in that product, and that is a perverse incentive. It puts agency capture on steroids. And as soon as we get a hold of NIH, we're going to reduce that $150,000 payment to $1.
Hi, I'm Barbie Engel, and I am a chronic pain patient, and I spent 7 years wheelchair and bedbound. And individualized care is what got me up and walking again. Can you talk about individualized care specifically with pharmacogenomics and or microbiome?
We have a one-size-fits-all system right now. I mean, let's take Medicaid. I think one of the most criminal public policy programs in the world. As Robert said, just on Medicaid, on mitochondrial dysfunction, it's a bigger part of our budget than the defense budget. And what is Medicaid? It's a highly incentivized program to get a poor kid sick. Because when a poor kid has high cholesterol, they are getting a statin. Right? When a poor kid is a little bit sad, they're getting an SSRI. They're getting on this pharmaceutical treadmill. There's no standard of care. It's about nutrition. There's no government money out of those $1.4 trillion we spend on Medicaid for nutrition or exercise or pushing that child and incentivizing a path of curiosity about their metabolic health. There's no discussion in the guidelines about the microbiome or what's destroying our gut with our pesticides and how 95% of a child's serotonin is created in their gut, not their brain, and how that impacts their happiness and so many other hormones. Not even discussed. Doctors don't learn that. My friends from Harvard Medical School who are OBGYNs don't even know what PCOS is caused by. That's the leading cause of female infertility. They know how to prescribe a hormone-inducing pill and do IVF. They don't know that PCOS is insulin resistance. It's on the spectrum of diabetes. And actually with the keto diet for 12 weeks, it's extraordinary how it can be reversed and fertility can be increased. So we have to get to healthcare flexibility. In the Republican platform, the central line is increasing healthcare flexibility. We need to open up this $4.5 trillion that we spend on healthcare and allow each parent, trust the American patient, trust parents, trust people on Medicaid who we just have disdain for that they can't make their own decisions. Open up flexibility in where that money can go. And I think we'll see most Americans follow the science and you know, not see high cholesterol as a statin deficiency. See it as a blaring warning sign of metabolic dysfunction. So that is a key thing that President Trump is talking about, that Robert has talked about, that the Republican platform talks about. We need to increase flexibility for where healthcare dollars can go and give Americans the correct science, and they're going to make the right decision.
And if I can add to that, right now there's a bill in front of Congress that is has bipartisan support. It's one of the few bipartisan bills in Congress, and that bill is going to make Ozempic available to anybody who is under Medicare and Medicaid to pay for Ozempic for any American who is diagnosed with obesity. That's 74% of our population, and it's $1,500 a month. The cost of that is $3 trillion annually to our country if that bill goes through. $3 trillion for a tiny fraction of that. You could buy an organic meal for every single American 3 meals a day. Oh, and the company that has bribed this bipartisan agreement, and that's why we have bipartisanship, because the one thing they agree on is the money that they're going to get. Novo Nordisk, which is the biggest company in Europe, is paying our congressmen and senators to pass this bill, which is going to pass because of legalized bribery. But in Denmark, and 90% of the value of that company is based upon its ability to sell Ozempic in this country, not in Denmark, not in Europe, here, because of our messed up system. And in Denmark, Ozempic is not recommended as the front line of defense for diabetes or for obesity. Changes in diet are, exercise are, individualized care. And so, this is all about corruption, ultimately. It's corruption. People are not treating illness. As Calley has said, the most profitable asset for the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, Medicare, Medicaid, the insurance industry in this country today is a sick child. And there's a huge incentive to make our children sick by giving them a standard of care that is guaranteed to make them sicker.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Garrett, and in January, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. I spent the month of January in and out of the hospital. So my question is, how will you work to decrease chronic illness diagnosis, but also fund a cure for chronic illness? Because it's too late to prevent it for me, but I don't want to fall victim to the pharmaceutical subscription model the rest of my life.
Thank you.
My sister, we talk about in the book, was looking over her third sinusitis surgery of the day, 11 years into training. People were so inflamed she was cutting open their sinuses. And she realized that after hundreds of these surgeries she didn't learn at Stanford Medical School, researching the NIH, president of her Stanford undergrad class, all the credentials you could have, she didn't understand what caused inflammation. Fundamentally in our medical system, we see chronic conditions. We wait for people to get them and then we drug them in their lifetime annuity. And I don't know your individual case, but there is a path of thriving. There's a path of thriving for Americans, both to prevent chronic conditions and to reverse. I mean, people with autoimmune conditions, Crohn's disease, the standard of care is injections and IVs for the rest of their life. And I have so many people come up to me and said that they started reading books by Mark Hyman, that they started reading books by functional medicine experts. They started getting personalized blood tests. Charlie's talked about this in his podcast, going down a path of real understanding what's personalized happening in your body. And they say that autoimmune disease diagnosis or their chronic disease diagnosis is actually one of the best moments of their life because it led them on a path outside of the medical system. And this is not about, as conservatives, as a conservative myself, it's not about lecturing anyone about what to eat. It's not about lecturing anyone to exercise. We should still be able to eat crappy food, drink beer, smoke cigarettes, whatever. But the clinical guidelines should be correct. like we should just have the correct information. So I would just say, this is what my sister and I, our cause in life, what we wrote in Book Good Energy, there is a path of thriving available for many folks suffering from chronic conditions, and there's a path to prevent many chronic conditions. And our goal, and I think what is so powerful about the MAHA movement, is it just starts with getting the science correct, which is just something we can all agree on, and that's going to flow down.
Hey, Bobby. Let's roll back the clock forward a few years. Imagine you're in a hypothetical Trump administration, hopefully soon to be, and there's a major policy breakthrough as it pertains to health and how it affects Americans. What would you want a news headline about that to look like? And let's assume it's a non-mainstream media outlet that's not going to, bash you because not a fake news one like CNN.
I didn't understand the question.
He was saying, give us what success might look like 3 years from now, if you're in the Trump administration, of a health breakthrough that you've been able to get done 3 years from now. Give us something that you would love to read, not in the New York Times, but read, on the Charlie Kirk show or something.
What I said when I was running myself, I said, and I think I'm going to be able to do this as a kind of a health czar in the Trump administration, is that within 2 years, you're going to see a dramatic, significant, measurable decrease in chronic health conditions in this country. And that within 4 years, we'll be down to at least the European levels, and we'll be on the way to eliminating chronic health conditions in our country. And I said, if I don't do that, you shouldn't vote for me a second term, because I'm very, and I would want a second term, so I'm very, very confident that I'm going to be able to get that done. I mean, even, you know, and Calley and I have a long list of things that we're going to do, beginning on day one in the first 90 days. But even doing things like banning fluoride in American water. Some things are going to be easy. Some of them are going to be more difficult. Most of the things, the way that Calley and I think about this, is that we want to accomplish all of this using executive orders and policy and personnel changes and never have to go to Congress for anything.
We'll do a couple more. Yes, sir. Is that okay?
Yeah.
My name is Will, and I'm a technology entrepreneur. And when I was 22 years old, I got a job in machine learning at the biggest health insurance company in the country. And after less than a year, I quit, realizing how the technology that I was building was being used to propagate and fuel something that fundamentally was destroying human health, not adding to it. And by the grace of God, I've moved from Minnesota to Arizona, and now I run a venture studio here. And I think Arizona is going to be an amazing Silicon Valley type place in the coming decades. But my question is this: for someone like me who's 29, who's building companies and products with artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies and sees where this tech is going and doesn't want to feed the beast, so to speak, but wants to see companies built that feed the MAHA movement, that align technology with human potential, how do we make America healthy again into the world of business and entrepreneurship? How do we change the incentive structures? Because there's so many incentive structures that take young people like me and put us into building for money because we need to when we're young, without realizing where our technologies are going. How do we change that from a top-down perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak a minute. I'm going to let Calley's path is very, very similar to yours because he started out in the same thing. So I'm going to, he started out working inside the industry, became disillusioned with it, and then, made his own path. So I think he's going to be very good at answering this. I'll say something about AI. AI is a two-edged sword. It's a frightening technology because it can be used by government agencies to warp our reality, to surveil us, to censor, to turn us into slaves. And that is, with all these technologies, the internet, remember when Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin promised us that the internet was going to democratize communications across the globe, and it's turned into instead of democratizing us, it's turned out to be the primary weapon for social control, for domination, for totalitarian controls of our society, for censorship, etc. The same thing could be true of AI, but AI can also do things that will democratize our government, that will make it more transparent, that will allow us to cure disease, that will, if we could get AI just to look at the public databases right now, and do medical informatics on those databases, we can look at every medical intervention immediately and do studies that would take 10 or 20 years in the past and do them in seconds. And it's an extraordinary promise for actually making people healthy very quickly. And this is one of the primary things my daughter-in-law, who's run my campaign, Amaryllis Fox, and who began her life at the CIA after 9/11 and worked in the espionage division and worked in cyber warfare for a long time. Nicole Shanahan, who was my VP. Those were people who specifically are committed and understand AI and its potential. We cannot overregulate AI in this country. We don't want to drive it into China, to Dubai, to Iran, to Eastern Europe. We want the center, the hub for AI to be in this country. We want the best minds in AI to come to this country, but we need to, it's a very, very ginger area, though. We need to make sure it does not turn into a technology for domination, but instead a technology that will make us healthier and more democratic. And I'm going to let Calley answer more specifically your question.
I'll be really quick. Americans want to be healthy when they're not looking at the corporate media, the books they're buying, the podcasts they're listening to from Joe Rogan on down are talking about ways that we can thrive and be healthy. So there's a real market with fundamentally, I think when you're doing healthcare in the private sector, you have to ask honestly, are you propping up the existing system, which just as a statement of economic fact makes money from patients being sick, or are you subverting that system? When I was starting a company, I talked to venture capitalists, and they said innovation is direct-to-consumer Viagra delivery. Viagra and a millennial pink box delivered to your door is not innovation. They said that it's better UX for medical records. Better medical records is not innovation. That's just slightly better UX for a completely broken system. My sister, after leaving medical school, started a company called Levels Health, which is a continuous glucose monitor. It gives people and arms them with more information. That's subversive. The FDA until just this year said that non-diabetics shouldn't have that information, shouldn't be able to see what's going on with their glucose. The FDA to this day says that preventative Pronovo screens are not advised. They do not want us to know what's going on inside of our bodies. And then after the death of our mother from a preventable condition, pancreatic cancer, which she should not have died from and should not have gotten after years of missed warning signs that we talk about in the book, I asked, how do we incentivize? How do we just incentivize the right standard of care? We started a company that uses HSA dollars, which most of us have access to. You can go to TrueMed.com and you can actually get a doctor's note for food, exercise, to reverse conditions. And no doctors know this. They can write you a doctor's note when you have high cholesterol and say that you should eat healthy and exercise as a medical recommendation, and you can use tax-free money for that. I don't want our company to exist. Every doctor in the country should be doing that. So I think Americans want to be healthy, and you have to be asking, how do you subvert the incentives and incentivize health?
Great. Thank you. This will be the final question. Yes.
Hello, I'm a TPUSA high school chapter member. And I was wondering what your take is on sugar alternatives like stevia, xanthan gum, sugar alcohols. Are those good alternatives or another thing that you're putting into your body that's unhealthy?
It's a great question.
It's a really great question. And
that's a turning point leader, right?
Yeah, 100%. That's a great question. Fundamentally, the USDA should throw out every single guideline with one principle, is that we should eat real food. And I think fundamentally 70% of your generation's diet right now is ultra-processed food. And if we can get that to 20%, we'll be an absolutely transformed society. Human capital will flourish. We'd have to save trillions of dollars. So I don't even want to get into the nitty-gritties. I think there's some problematic research on a lot of these artificial sweeteners. I think they're not the worst thing to worry about, but I think fundamentally, way before that, I think a focus an administration should have is just getting back to real food, and really thinking about that.
Bobby, closing thoughts here. Summarize the entire evening. Vote Trump.
Yeah. I mean, if our ambition, I grew up in a very idealistic time in our country's history, and when I was a little boy, America owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were a moral authority around the world. When I traveled with my father abroad, we were greeted with crowds, sometimes crowds of millions of people who just loved our country all over the world. And we had the best education system. We were #1 education system. We had the best health care, but we also had the healthiest people in the world in our country. We had we invented the middle class in this country. We had a giant middle class, and it became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And it was democratized. We were the exemplary nation when we had the American Revolution and passed the Bill of Rights in 1792. We were the only democracy in the world. And by 1860, there were 5 democracies, all based on our model. By the time my uncle was president, there were 130. By the end of the 1960s, there were 190. The whole world was looking to us. And now, there was a turning point in 1992 when we won the Cold War. And we thought this was a triumph for our country, and it turned out to be a catastrophe. And the arrogance that came around it, along with that unleashed our military around the world with dreams of global domination as the only world superpower, the domination of our country by corporate power, that has commoditized our landscapes by the big polluters, our health by the big pharmaceutical industries, our children by the food industry, has turned all of the institutions of democracy predatory against the American public. We're seeing now this inversion in the two parties. And, one of the things that Charlie said to me earlier on this evening was that Donald Trump chased all the rich people out of the out of the Republican Party. And he's made this party the party of the American middle class, restoring the middle class, the party of small businesses, of Main Street, of public health, of peace, of global leadership, and all of the things that are, when Democrats hear the word MAGA, they say, oh, it's racism, it's the opposite of progressive thought, it's intolerance. But I look at MAGA and I talk to MAGA people all over this country and MAHA people all over this country, and it's the opposite of that. They're the most idealistic, optimistic people. They love our country. And when we talk about making America great again, that's what I think about making it the country before we took that wrong turn after my uncle's assassination and after the 1960s. We started down that road, and we've been on a downhill slope ever since then. And we now need to return it to the idealism of the 1960s. We can do that now. Here's the thing. We have terrible problems in this country. We have the worst agricultural system in the world, but all of our problems are accompanied by a potential that is greater than any other country in the world. We have the worst agricultural system, but we have the best regenerative farmers. We're doing things with soil restoration, with no-till agriculture, with dry land agriculture, with organic agriculture that no other country in the world is doing. We have the worst health in our country of any country in the world, but we have the best integrated medicine doctors, the best functional medical doctors. We are breaking grounds in new ways of restoring and treating the causes of chronic disease. We have a declining business culture in our country that is a monopoly business that is corporate crony capitalism has replaced free market capitalism, but we have the greatest entrepreneurs in our country. And I'm not just saying that, as a kind of bluster that America has the best of this, that. What I'm saying is true. You talk to any country in the world, the entrepreneurs in this country are a different breed than you can find anywhere. And so we have the potential, we have this tremendous resilience in this country where we can restore these things, restore America's greatness again, if we just stop fighting each other and we focus on getting Donald Trump elected president and getting this unity government in power to make America healthy again.
Well said. Thank you guys so much. One more time.